Bonjour à tous, welcome to all. I'm Boris Prou, reporter for Le Devoir, and I'll be moderating this press conference. We have a few guests today. I'll let them self-introduce themselves, and then we'll go to the question period, first in the room and then on Zoom. So if you are attending on Zoom, please use the raise hand function during the press conference, and I'll hand you over the mic. On that, I'll let you the floor.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. For those that you don't know, my name is Vance Badawey. I am the Member of Parliament for Niagara Centre and the Parliamentary Secretary for Indigenous Services Canada under Minister Patty Hajdu. I'll start off by saying, again, not only a welcome, but a sincere appreciation for all of you for being here this afternoon on an issue that we've been dealing with for a long, long time, but myself personally and the people next to me for the past few, I guess, decades for the most part. To Bob and to yourself, Mr. Mayor. It's Bert. I always refer to you as your worship or Mr. Mayor, as we often do, with great respect to what you do. I was a mayor in my former life, and I can attest to the amount of work that you do on a daily basis. So I'm happy you're here, and it's great to have you out to this summit. Ladies and gentlemen, 50 years ago, the Great Lakes were at rock bottom. Decades of pollution made our water unfit to drink or to swim in. Fish were toxic. Lake Erie, for example, was declared dead. Rivers burned. Society said enough and demanded action. Governments listened. Canada and the United States signed the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which set our two nations on a path of heightened cooperation to restore these magnificent treasures. Cooperation and good relations between our two nations is nothing new. We have been at peace for more than 200 years, and our cross-border economies are inextricably linked, as many of you know. We signed the Boundary Waters Treaty in 1909. This to ensure cooperation over water quantity, and the Convention on the Great Lakes Fisheries in 1954. To create the Great Lakes Fishery Commission to help us collaborate over our shared fisheries, both nations working together. The Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement of 1972 has helped us together achieve a remarkable turnaround from where we were when the lakes were essentially written off. And bodies like the Fishery Commission and the International Joint Commission complement that base. Although the Water Quality Agreement established a binational commitment to restore and maintain the chemical, the physical, and biological integrity of the waters of the Great Lakes, the first successes were modest, but nonetheless important. We together reversed the over-eutrophication of Lake Erie through phosphorus targets that we set together. But not only Lake Erie, all the Great Lakes, and of course working toward our responsibility and respect for fresh water throughout both Canada and the United States. That early success gave us the confidence to tackle larger problems, like areas of concern. Areas so degraded that future use would not be possible without the implementation of a cleanup plan. But most importantly, not only a plan, action, to execute what we identified through our strategic planning on both sides of the border. The latest iteration of the agreement, signed in 2012, goes even further with attention to invasive species, habitat, nutrients, and the myriad of other issues. Since 1972, we have not wavered. We have not wavered in our joint approach, really, our joint commitment to each other and to the lakes, as well as the people that share those Great Lakes on both sides of the border, to stop the hemorrhage, restore what was lost, and prevent the next threat to the lakes from ever happening again. In 2022, as we celebrated 50 years of progress toward Great Lakes restoration, we also celebrated the strong bilateral relations our two nations enjoy. But now is the time for us to recommit to these tasks. Today, as part of a binational freshwater summit, we are again working to leverage our strong relationships for the betterment of the Great Lakes. But this can only be done if we also do what we can do together. Together to better the Great Lakes, domestically, but as well the contribution that we give binationally and, quite frankly, internationally. As Prime Minister Turner once said, think locally, but act globally. This must be done, and it is rooted by partnerships, by working together. In the spirit of partnership and binationalism, I am particularly thrilled to be joined here today by two members of the U.S. House of Representatives. Firstly, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell of southeastern Michigan, whose district is in the Lake Erie Basin. And I'm also pleased to present a video message from Representative Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin. Both of these representatives work each and every day to advance the health and sustainability of the Great Lakes. And I am here to urge that Canada join them in their partnership. Quite frankly, in our partnership. I also note that both Mrs. Dingell, as well as others throughout the House of Representatives, again, work in a bipartisan fashion and ensure that the Great Lakes is beyond partisanship, as well as politics in general, that in fact it concentrates on the business of government. Mrs. Dingell co-chairs the Congressional Great Lakes Task Force, a task force that has existed since the early 1990s and demonstrates the value of bipartisanship. Here in Parliament, several members of Parliament and senators know we could do more to drive freshwater policy. As such, we formed the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Task Force. This, formed in 2020, was partially inspired by the success of the U.S. Task Force. That body and our body is truly multi-partisan group. Bipartisan, bicameral, meaning the House and the Senate, as well as binational, and working to the overall benefit and the betterment of the Great Lakes. I am also thrilled to have Cameron Davis with us today. Mr. Davis served as President Obama and Biden's Great Lakes czar, charged with implementing the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, a multi-billion-dollar effort to direct resources to areas where they are badly needed. Mr. Davis worked with Mrs. Dingell and others to ensure effective implementation. They executed a greatly thought-out plan. The initiative continues to this day and is widely credited for tremendous progress toward attaining Great Lakes restoration initiatives, ultimately satisfying the objectives that were identified by working together and putting a plan in place, identifying those deliverables, attaching actions, and executing. I'm pleased to say that CAM is now working with myself and many others here in Parliament to bring these kind of visionary programs here to this great nation. We are joined by Bob Lambe, the Executive Secretary of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, and Reeve Bert Liverance of the Township. I'm sure that's going to be a city pretty soon.
Township, the Archipelago.
It's a township right now.
It's a township.
And it's growing, I hear.
No.
No, not yet. The township of Archipelago. Mr. Reeve, again, I just have to take this opportunity to sort of go off script for a second, because I know and I've heard how much work that you're putting into this file, and I want to thank you for that. You're showing a lot of leadership. You're inspiring a lot of people to follow suit, not only yourself as a Reeve, but many mayors and others, members of council throughout the great country of Canada, here in the province of Ontario, and what you're doing, it's very much commended, and I want to thank you for that. Great work.
Thank you.
Thank you. As I said, these two individuals are a shining example of those on the ground working hard to keep the great in Great Lakes, and I want to thank them for being here today. And to you, I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. So let us begin. We do have some words from, now do we have Representative Gallagher queued up to go? He's not going to, we're having some tech problems there? Okay. So we're going to start off with Congresswoman Dingell. Congresswoman Dingell is going to give us some remarks, provide us with some short remarks. And I first want to say, and knowing Congresswoman Dingell for quite some time, I appreciate that she's here today, and I am going to open the floor up to her, but I also want to start off by saying, Congresswoman, thank you. Thank you for the great amount of work that you've been doing on this. You know, it's always nice to get down to Capitol Hill to see you in person. Today we couldn't do that to get you down here to Parliament, but I do want to take this opportunity to thank you for being with us, although virtually, to give us a few words. Congresswoman, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everyone. It's great to join you virtually, but I wish that I could be there with you in person. But this subject that we're talking about today, the importance of investing in our Great Lakes, a treasured natural resource for both of our countries, is very important to me. I want to thank our Member of Parliament, Badawey, who is a good friend who cares so deeply about all this, for inviting me, Senator Cordy, Mr. Mayor. I haven't met you, but I hope I do sometime soon. It's great to hear that Cam Davis is also here, and everyone else. I think a message to all of you is that we do have a very committed partnership between all of this and how important it all is. I always tell everybody, I actually was talking about it today, because while today we're talking about the waters themselves, we've obviously had some shared sky concerns above us, and our two nations are friends. And I said to someone, every day when I woke up as a child, I looked out my window and I saw Canada. And Canada was closer to me than the Cannon Building in Washington, D.C. is to Rayburn. We are neighbors and communities. But I want to, a couple of months ago, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, marking decades of partnership between the U.S. and Canada to protect our waters. Thanks to this agreement, the United States and Canada have worked together alongside countless state and provincial governments, hundreds of municipalities and local authorities, First Nations and tribal governments, industry leaders, intergovernmental organizations, and the public to sustain our Great Lakes ecosystems. For thousands of years and across generations, no other freshwater system in the world has inspired greater economic prosperity, quality of life, binational unity than the waters of Lake Michigan, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, and Lake Superior. I remind everybody we're more than 20% of the fresh water in the world. The Great Lakes matter to so many. It's our responsibility to ensure that these massive treasured resources are protected for all time from pollution that's been emerging from contaminants, climate change, invasive species, harmful algae blooms, and threats to wildlife and their habitat. As co-chair of the Great Lakes Task Force in Congress, I continually keep pulling everybody together to lead the fight for investing in the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which has been fundamental to protecting, restoring, and maintaining the Great Lakes ecosystem. Year after year, the GLRI has consistently proven to be an economic and environmental success. Since its inception in 2010, more than $3.3 billion has been used to fund 6,850 projects to combat the greatest threats to the Great Lakes. The bipartisan infrastructure law, which passed last year in the Congress, included $1 billion for the GLRI. And I'm going to continue to ensure that we have dedicated funding like this. We've got to do it to protect our Great Lakes. But Canada and the United States have a shared responsibility to care for these treasured waters. This strong record of support by the United States, the government of Canada but here's our concern. Canada has not appropriated funding similar to the monies that we have done. It's important for Canada to ensure the commitment to our shared Great Lakes, and I know you have it. But we've got to make sure that if we're going to protect our ecosystem, that both of our countries are working together to protect the Great Lakes. Safe water is essential to our families, our communities, and businesses to thrive. I look forward to continuing to work with my colleagues in both the U.S. Congress, alongside our partners across the country and in Canada, to ensure that the freshwater in the Great Lakes watershed is protected for the 100 million people in the region who have chosen to work, raise their family, and enjoy the outdoors here. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. It's always a pleasure, Congresswoman Dingell, to have you out, and I appreciate your comments. I, in particular, appreciate the comments with respect to the funding. It's something that we're fighting hard for here, and we're hoping that members of cabinet will hear us loud and clear this year, going into this year's budget, and of course appropriate the $1 billion ask that we're moving forward with and resolving at today's summit. So I thank you for those comments. Thank you, Congressman. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you folks to Bob Lambe. Bob, as I mentioned earlier, is the Executive Secretary of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, and Bob's with us today to pass on some words with respect to the treaty organization that has been working in broader manner having to do with the Great Lakes for nearly 70 years, Bob. It's been a long time, so I'm sure you've been around that long, and no, you haven't.
Feels like it some days.
No, you haven't. But I know you've been part of this organization for quite some time, and I do want to thank you as well for your involvement with that, and of course the people that you work with. So Bob, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you, Mr. Badawey. So I am the Executive Secretary of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, and so I'll just provide you with a little bit of context to come up to present day. So the commission was established, as Mr. Badawey said, in 1955 through the convention in 1954, and primarily established to deal with issues that the domestic programs in the U.S. and domestic programs in Canada couldn't deal with on a cross-border perspective. And so at that point, and by the early 1950s, the fishery, the Great Lakes fishery, had been decimated, and it's worth a lot more than. I'm from Newfoundland originally, and used to coastal fisheries being the lifeblood of many communities. And it wasn't until I relocated to Ontario in the 90s that I really came to appreciate how important the Great Lakes fishery is, not only from a cultural, recreational perspective, but from an economic perspective as well. And so in today's dollars, the Great Lakes fishery is worth $8 billion annually. And so when we say that the fishery was devastated, it's a pretty significant thing. And so the fishery was devastated for essentially three reasons. One, it had been decades of mismanaged or uncoordinated fishery management. Secondly, there was no research or science to advise fishery management decision-making. And then the third thing was the arrival of the invasive sea lamprey, which was the final death knell for the fishery. And so the the situation had gotten so badly at that point that the two governments signed the treaty, signed the convention, and established the commission. And so, not surprisingly, the mandate of the commission became to address those three issues: to provide coordinated research to advise fishery management, to coordinate fishery management amongst the 8 Great Lakes states and the province of Ontario, and later the tribal interests, and then thirdly, to devise a program, bi-national program, and implement it to control sea lamprey. And so the sea lamprey was the first thing that was tackled, and through good science and a bit of luck, I might say, by 1957, 58, we had found a pesticide that was very selective to sea lamprey, and we used that to control sea lamprey. And that's a long story about how that's been brought under control, but compared to where we were when we started, we have the population reduced by 90%, and that allows the state and provincial governments then to reinvest in the fishery. So it would be nice to have them eradicated, sea lamprey eradicated, but that's just not practical economically. So the fish community objectives that have been established for Great Lakes fishery are largely based on keeping lamprey populations subdued by that 90% level. So that's an ongoing challenge, and we certainly took a blow during COVID when we weren't able to get out and do treatment, and the numbers really rebound quickly. But we're confident that within the next 3, 4, 5 years, we'll get it back down. We'll certainly get it trending in the right direction again. So that was the first challenge that we tackled. Second challenge was to try and bring about some way to coordinate fishery management amongst those multiple jurisdictions that I mentioned. And so in 1965, the genesis of that structure was set up, and it continues to be very successful today. We often are called to present around the world, Africa, Europe, other nations, about how that jurisdictional structure works in terms of resource management. So that continues to be successful. And then the third thing was to coordinate research, coordinate science in order to advise on fishery management and sea lamprey control. So those continue to be our 3 primary mandate areas still today. I won't go any more into context, but I will say that just to provide you with sort of background as to where we are today. The issues we face today are much different than we had back in the 50s. Those things that led to the problems in the 50s still are prevalent today, and that's why we need to stay on top of them. But what we're finding now is that we need to have a much more what we call an ecosystem approach. So you can't manage the fishery in isolation of water quality. You can't manage riparian management in isolation of water quality and so on. So the challenge now is to start to manage things in a more ecosystem approach. And to give you a good example of how not managing to ecosystem approach causes problems, most of us are pretty familiar with the algal blooms that we have in Lake Erie that has caused water treatment plants to be shut down in recent years. And that's because we have too much phosphorus, too much loading on the near shore in the lakes. At the same time, we have aquatic life, fish, starving in the offshore of the lakes because there aren't enough nutrients. So how can that possibly be, where you have nutrients near shore causing algal blooms and shutting water treatment plants down, and fish not being able to reproduce in the offshore? And there are multiple reasons for that, but the prime reason I would argue is that we have quagga mussels, we have zebra mussels that are shunting the transfer of nutrients from the offshore to from the near shore to the offshore. And so this is where we're stuck now, is without a different level of investment, without programs that are more holistic, then these are the problems that we run into. And that's where Canada really needs to step up now. The U.S. has stepped up. The U.S. kind of reached that plateau 10 years ago where it realized that it had gotten a bit complacent with its spending, and the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, or GLRI, was the answer to that. And we really haven't responded to the same level in Canada, and that's going to be our challenge going forward. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Bob. Well said. And I have to say, the work that you folks do at the Great Lakes Fishery Commission, as well as working with all the other groups on both sides of the border, is once again to be commended. So I want to thank you for that. It's now my pleasure to introduce you to Cameron Davis. Cameron, as I mentioned earlier, served as President Obama and Biden's Great Lakes czar, and was charged with implementing what Bob had just mentioned, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative on the U.S. side of the border. And this initiative is a multi-billion-dollar effort to direct resources to areas, as I said earlier, where they are badly needed out throughout the Great Lakes in the U.S. and, of course, affecting Canada. So with that, Cam, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Vance. In my almost 40 years of doing Great Lakes work, I've come to understand that the U.S. and Canada are in a marriage, and they all live in the home called North America. We have something called the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which serves as the two countries' marriage vows. And one of the things that is really important, as many of us know, in a marriage vow, is that we say what we're going to do and we do what we're going to say. As part of our commitment, whether it's written in the Water Quality Agreement or not, it is to make sure that we are providing the resources that we need in both countries to make sure that we are continuing to make sure that the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence provide safe, clean drinking water, provide outdoor opportunities and recreation, to provide a quality of life that continues to help pay for itself. I think the list goes on and on and on. But we started in the U.S. with a commitment and have been, over the years, funding work to help carry through on that commitment. And here in Canada, it's something where we want to make sure that our wedding vows between the two countries are implemented. And so Canada being able to enhance its budget so that it can follow through on its commitments as part of that North American vow is absolutely critical. And I'll leave it at that. Vance, thank you.
Thank you, Cam. Much appreciated. And to you as well. The past few years, when we got into this and sort of really getting into the thick of it, you came on down and you're helping us out. So with the experience that you had working in the States, now doing some work with us is very much appreciated. And I have to say this, it's really prevented us from going down some of those wrong paths that I'm sure you experienced in the early days. You know, the old saying, I wish I knew then, I wish I knew now what I know then, really came true with your experience and what you've been able to offer us. So thank you for that. I'm now going to move the floor over to an individual that I just met and found out quickly how much work he is doing on the Great Lakes. The Reeve of the township of Archipelago on Georgian Bay. Archipelago is a small community in the wintertime, 600 people, but grows quite a lot in the summertime of 1,600 people. And primarily, that's because of the lakes and the water that people are attracted to. So, Mr. Reeve, the floor is all yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Bert Liverance. I am the Reeve of the Township of the Archipelago. It's a pleasure to be joining these esteemed guests and to represent the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative today and talk about the importance of investing to protect and ensure good stewardship of our fresh water. The Cities Initiative is a binational coalition of more than 230 mayors working to improve the socioeconomic and environmental health of the communities in the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River basins. As a representative of a small community in the beautiful Georgian Bay, I can tell you that fresh water is one of our most valuable resources and distinctive features. The township of the Archipelago is located in the Georgian Bay Mindugami Biosphere region, which is situated within the Anishinaabeg territory along the eastern shore of Georgian Bay. The archipelago is the largest freshwater archipelago in the world, characterized by numerous islands, bays, and wetlands that attract large numbers of visitors and boaters in the summer. 1/3 of our seasonal residents come from outside of Canada. People come to our region for our clear blue water, our sand beaches, and the rugged granite shores immortalized by the Group of Seven. Our proximity to fresh water is what makes Georgian Bay a world-class destination. We want to make sure it stays that way. Preserving source water quality is a shared concern among local elected leaders across the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence River Basin. Our residents in the archipelago drink the fresh water directly from the bay, which makes it vitally important that the water is potable. Sadly, by the time the fresh water of Great Lakes reaches the Atlantic Ocean from the St. Lawrence, it is undrinkable. Only by investing in and protecting this resource will we be able to continue delivering clean, safe, and affordable fresh water to our communities and residents and sustain the blue economy on which our waterfront communities and local industries thrive. In that regard, protecting the quality and the integrity of water, fish habitat, and wetlands and shorelands is not only an environmental imperative, it is also an economic one. 80% of the archipelago land is either provincial parkland or crown land. The environment is the economic engine of the township of the archipelago. Looking at boating, hunting, and fishing alone, we're talking about more than $52 billion annually in economic activity for our region. That's why the city's initiative is joining other organizations from coast to coast to coast to ask the Government of Canada to make the investment of $1 billion in its freshwater action plan, and to finally launch an independent Canada Water Agency to provide national leadership on the issue. The Government of Canada's investment will yield a similar, if not better, return on investment than the U.S. Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which realized a return on investment of $3 for every dollar invested by the U.S. federal government. The time for Canada to act is now, and we hope to see real action on freshwater in this year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Reeve Liverance. It's a pleasure having you as part of that group, I'll tell you. I worked in that group for many, many years, and the work that you do is commendable, not only in terms of being able to enjoy the water, but also being able to drink the water and, of course, take full advantage of the fresh water that we have here in Canada. In Archipelago, lucky to have you, and lucky to have many of the residents that come out and visit the area. You have to get out there this summer. It sounds like a beautiful place. And,
Invitation's open.
Love to get out there, but thank you. Thank you, Bert. I really appreciate your involvement. And I guess I'll say in closing that, and before we take questions, I do want to reiterate that the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence are binational treasures, and that it provides countless social, economic, and ecological benefits. I often call it the triple bottom line when it comes to our economy, our environment, and our social/cultural benefits that come from the Great Lakes. And it's a lens that we all have to look through when we're actually making decisions that affect the Great Lakes. I'm proud to be working to advance their preservation with colleagues as a team effort, binationally. And on behalf of everybody here, I do want to call upon the governments at all levels and in all places to do more to protect our freshwater resources. And I'll say this, we all have an opportunity. We all have an opportunity to stand on a stage, whether it be in public life, whether it be in private life, whether it be as media or others, to make a difference, to contribute a positive influence and ensure that future generations are better off because of what we've been able to work together to achieve. And we always want to try and achieve the areas of which we have, live, work, or play. We always want to ensure that we leave it better than when we found it. And the Great Lakes are a prime example of that. And I'll steal I guess as a Philadelphia Flyer fan, I'll steal a saying or a quote that Fred Sherrill once said back in the 1970s when the Flyers were in the finals against the Buffalo Sabres. And that was that when we win together today, succeed together today, work together today, we live together forever. And that's in fact what we're doing here. Binationally, Canada, US, we're working together today to live together forever. And part of that is to preserve the assets that we have available to us. That respect, that responsibility is going to be up to us to then hand off to the next generation. And as I said this morning in my opening comments, words motivate, action inspires. And we're now prepared to provide that action to, in fact, not only inspire the work to be done today, but also to the work that will be done many generations beyond us. So with that, I'll take some questions.
Merci, thank you. I see no questions on Zoom for the moment. So here in the room, Stephanie Levitz at Toronto Star.
Hi, Stephanie Levitz from the Toronto Star. I'm gathering the Congresswoman has left. So my question is actually for you, Reeve, as it relates to the air incident over Lake Huron. Given that you are on the shores of the lake over in Georgian Bay, have you been told anything about the search efforts there? What's the latest information? Have you been given any from the government or security officials about the search process in Lake Huron?
Well, actually, Georgian Bay is a body of water east of Lake Huron,
Yeah.
so it would not have an impact on
Okay.
us.
Thanks. That was it for me.
I see no further questions, so that puts an end to this press conference. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you, everyone.